Like Jenny said, I am Steven Zarembka. I'm a naturopathic doctor down at Scarborough Integrative Health. Down there, we kind of focus on a real integrative approach to many conditions that are becoming more and more common. And as part of, as being a naturopathic doctor, we really always stress foundational aspects of health. And tonight, my goal is to speak to you guys about something that is fundamentally foundational to health, and that is sleep. So, in general, if I were to offer you a pill, and this pill was absolutely free, and we knew that it could help protect you from degeneration of neurons, protect you from Alzheimer's, help reduce your tendency towards obesity, help you perform better on movement skills, and this was a free form of medicine, who would not want to take this type of medicine? I know I would like to take it. Since reading a lot of the research that I was really delved into over the past 2 months or so, sleep is beyond fascinating. I'm really excited to share what I've learned with you guys. So let's start here. So a little bit of an overview. What we know and don't know about the anatomy and physiology of sleep. It was really around it wasn't until the 1960s that the EEG, that electroencephalogram that measures those brain waves, came into fruition. And it wasn't until the early 2000s that we had some of this more advanced imaging and functional MRIs that could really show us what's going on during the sleep process. Sleep science, what current research has to say about circadian rhythm and sleep. We'll talk about your brain's housekeeping system and why it only works when you sleep. This was something that really was only discovered a little bit over a decade ago, so we're learning stuff every single day. Environmental factors that may be contributing to poor sleep. Hormones and blood sugar handling, what this has to do with sleep regulation. Biohacking sleep versus restoring sleep. So we'll talk a little bit about what's out there in the realm of this supplement for this issue versus really a full integrative, more of a naturopathic approach to restoring sleep and health. Sleep as your best medicine, and then also, of course, integrative approaches to different sleep issues. So sleep defined, a few definitions up here: medical definition, Webster's definition, and also our friend and philosopher Aristotle. So there's been many philosophies over the span of millennia as far as why we sleep. And before we had all this advanced imaging, etc., we really had many different ideas. And it's interesting because some of the philosophers have been pretty darn close to kind of nailing why we sleep and what research has shown. So interesting little factoid, study of 71,000 nurses published in 2003 showed that those who slept 5 hours or less had a 45% greater risk of developing heart disease after 10 years than those sleeping 8 hours. So pretty substantial fact there. Okay, so all mammals sleep, and believe it or not, so do plants and so do insects. Not in the traditional sense, but they definitely have a circadian rhythm. So horses, cows, and giraffes, they can sleep when standing, but we'll need to lie down for shorter, and we'll talk about the sleep cycles, but when they're in their REM state. There are also other animals that will allow half their brain to sleep while the other half stays awake, while they're doing long migrations, so such as dolphins and different birds as well. The brown bat sleeps more than any known mammal, so 19 hours per day. And also, the male pig is very good at putting people to sleep. You could say he's a little bit of a bore. All right. So, overview and quick facts. In general, big overview of this talk, sleep is a vital component of human health. Lack of restorative sleep will lead to reproducible and predictable changes in almost every parameter of health that matters. So we want to have the best quality of life and ultimately the best quantity, the best years. Definitely start paying attention to sleep and what we can do to enhance that. We spend about 1/3 of our life sleeping, of course. Average lifespan around 25 years or so. I did the math. I happen to love the 1997 hit Titanic with Leonardo DiCaprio. And you could actually watch that movie 73,000 times in the time that we sleep over the span of a lifetime. So pretty fun. 30% of all adults and 60% of adolescents in general are sleep deprived in the US. And we'll talk a lot about those adolescents and those teenage years and why those are vital years for development and how sleep totally can have a big impact on school and performance as well. Less than 6 hours of sleep per night increases the risk of stroke by 4.5%, so that's pretty substantial. And interesting little facts, 41% of adults prefer to sleep in the fetal position, while only 8 prefer to sleep on their back. And I'm definitely one of those that prefer to sleep in the fetal position. Time has changed things drastically. So back in 1942, in the 40s, we know that we were getting a lot more sleep than we currently are today. People are working more. People have environmental and external things that are influencing our circadian rhythms. So 35% of adults don't get enough sleep, 7 hours per day, according to the CDC. So I like this chart. It kind of shows sleep requirements by age. So when we are infants, when we're right out of the womb, we need a ton of sleep. I mean, this is all about growth and development. Interesting fact I learned, when the mom gets the kick, or in the belly, when you get that kick, that's actually not the baby being awake. That's actually more of a REM cycle sleep that still hasn't completely developed. So pretty interesting there. 20% of teenagers will get less than 5 hours of sleep. 43% of new parents with babies 0 to 6 months old get just 1 to 3 hours of undisturbed sleep on a regular basis. So that really fragmentation of sleep throughout the night can be a huge issue for new parents, and it can take up to 6 years, until a child is 6 years, to really recoup a lot of that sleep deprivation that they lose. And as we get older, sleep does tend to come at it's a little bit harder to develop good sleep cycles, and some of these times of sleep when we're really trying to learn and recuperate old new facts. So learning and sleep are very much connected, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. We'll fly through the anatomy and physiology of sleep. So circadian rhythm. So definition, it's found in all mammals, and it synchronizes, believe it or not, in the absence with or without light. So they've done experiments, both human and plants, where humans will go into a cave where there's no detectable light whatsoever, and they've hooked them up to the fancy instruments, and believe it or not, they were able to maintain their circadian rhythm for an extended period of time. So while light is very important for setting that circadian rhythm, our circadian rhythm will still work to some extent without light as well. So we have a body clock. So the circadian rhythm, for many reasons, if there's dysfunction, it's associated with many, many conditions, and the top ones being, of course, insomnia, but also metabolic issues like diabetes and also obesity as well. So interestingly, there have been definitive studies showing that Olympic athletes tend to break their records at a certain point of the day, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And there are some committees that are trying to propose not doing Olympic events at certain times of the day, just to increased risk of injury. So quick video here. So it was in the 1920s that it was a French researcher who took a plant, and it was called Mimosa pudica. And we use Mimosa pudica a lot in practice. Part of the plant is really good for sleep. It's an antidepressant, also an anti-anxiety. And he took Mimosa pudica and he observed the changes in the leaves throughout the day and how it either accepted or didn't accept light. And it really established its own circadian rhythm. And this was the first time that they took the plants and they put boxes over them, just like the human experiment, and they saw the circadian rhythm of the plant still do its thing even in the absence of light. And this is just a cool short 20-second clip about how plants are reacting to light in a time lapse. So there's no wind, this is totally concealed, and you can see they take on a certain life, how they accept the sunlight throughout the day. Also, when they're getting fed. Yeah. Okay, so this is a great summary slide of circadian rhythm, and our circadian rhythm goes far beyond just sleep. So everything from body temperature to hormone secretion to blood pressure and even temperature is going to shift throughout the day in a very predictable fashion. And the goal in maintaining health and maintaining our circadian rhythm is to not do too many things to push these parameters too far out of the normal rhythm in general. So if you'll notice, deepest sleep should be somewhere around 2 o'clock. Lowest body temperature is going to be around 4:30. So when you wake up around that time, it's not atypical for us to reach for an extra blanket sometimes, even during the summertime. And that athletic performance, if we look up here, best coordination right around that 2 to 5 o'clock area. Great cardiovascular efficiency and muscle strength. So that's a wonderful time if you're really trying to work out in a performance magnitude. Sleep's main anatomical players fly through this suprachiasmatic nucleus, controls the production of melatonin. It's part of what's called the hypothalamus in the brain, and I'll have a diagram of this. And really its goal is to help so we get some feedback from light during the day, and it hits the retina in the back of the eye, and it goes through a pathway, and it's going to communicate with the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And at the end of the day, when light goes down, it's going to be part of the control system that's telling us when to output melatonin production. Ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, known as a sleep switch, gets very important information about circadian rhythm as well from that suprachiasmatic nucleus. Thalamus has a lot to do with our REM sleep, and during that REM sleep, it really helps to inhibit body movement. So even though our dreams are very much alive and we can be running, and in our dreams we shouldn't be flailing at night. And thalamus, part of its job is to inhibit those motor signals. Pineal gland, primarily responsible for the actual secretion of the melatonin. So, right there, suprachiasmatic nucleus, eyeball, retina here, travels back, and eventually will produce the melatonin. So on this side, we have, this is day. So this is a wakeful state. And these are some of the neurotransmitters involved, and they're all labeled. I really just want to bring your attention to a couple of these. 5-HT, which is serotonin, and GABA, which is gamma aminobutyric acid. So these are very much involved not only in our mood, but also in sleep regulation. So think of this as kind of during the day, a wakeful state, and this is more the pathway that's involved during the at night. So two big sleep factors that drive sleep. One thing is called adenosine and sleep pressure. Adenosine itself is a chemical, and it's a byproduct of really a lot of our cellular energy. But as it builds during the day, we can think of it as a pressure cooker. So throughout the day, we're building more and more adenosine, and this pressure is eventually part of what's going to tell us that we can become sleepy and tired. So sleep pressure plus the circadian rhythm, that direct light that we should receive in the morning, and then eventually the light going down at night, those two factors are really what are setting sleep in motion. So again, increasing adenosine throughout the day definitely increases the desire to sleep. So think of it as kind of turning the volume down of the wake-promoting areas of the brain. On average, as we go throughout our day, 12 to 16 hours is the average where we start to see people start to nod off, get a little bit tired. So anybody have a guess as far as what blocks adenosine receptors? What is it?
Like computer screen, TV.
Could be, not as direct, but I heard another. Caffeine. Caffeine for sure. So caffeine, we know coffee, second most traded commodity in the world behind oil. There's no shortage of coffee. It is a non-regulated substance at the end of the day that we all to some way may or may not abuse. Of course, chocolate as well. So between caffeine and Theophylline, these are two very known potent adenosine receptors, antagonists. So interestingly, with adenosine blockage, there becomes a little bit of a buildup. So if we block those receptors with the caffeine, what's going to happen is that adenosine is still going to build. And once those receptors, those sites are freed, then there's going to be an influx of that adenosine. And that's what leads to that kind of coffee crash, where we have that coffee. The half hour of coffee is give or take 5 to 7 hours in the average person. And when things start to wear down, some people can have to reach for that second cup of coffee. So in general, a good sign that you might be dealing with some sort of sleep deprivation or might need to look at sleep is if you need that morning coffee to really get up and do your thing. So sleep cycles, we're going to talk a lot about this. They last approximately 90 minutes. It can be anywhere from 80 to 120 minutes. On average, you're going to see 4 to 5 to 6 potentially sleep cycles per night. First half of the night is dominated what's called slow non-REM sleep. And then the second half is more dominated by the REM sleep, that rapid eye movement sleep. Busy slide, but awake right now, definitely me. I'm not alpha, but I'm going to be more in the beta state, so that kind of alert state. And as we start to calm down, you start producing these alpha waves, which are really, you're still awake, but you're starting to get more and more relaxed. So right before you kind of fall asleep, we're entering into an alpha state. And from there, we go into 3 different phases of non-REM sleep before we enter REM sleep. And it's not a consistent cycle throughout the night. For the first sleep cycle it is, but then it jumps around a little bit. And again, big take home, early hours of the night, that non-REM sleep is going to be dominating our sleep quality, or it's what we're experiencing during sleep, versus REM is going to be more prominent during the second half of sleep. So these are looking right here at the waves themselves. We'll talk about what's called these spindles, and then the cave complexes as well, which are definitely unique to that stage 2 of non-REM sleep. And then delta waves are these slow, high amplitude and rhythmic waves that occur in our deepest stage of sleep. And then finally, when we do enter REM sleep, there's not a ton of difference between REM and being awake. So there are many overlaps in brain activity between an awake person and someone in REM sleep. So why do we sleep? Healing, growth factors, reflection, and memory consolidation, especially memory that's fact-based. So if I asked you to memorize 10 facts right now, to pair matches, really the part of the sleep that's going to be most beneficial for helping us consolidate this and turn it into long-term memory is going to be this non-REM sleep stage. So I kind of gave it away, but that's the non-REM sleep stage. So 3 phases kind of typed out for you. Eyes are closed in stage 1, but it's easy to wake you up. This first stage might last just 5 to 10 minutes. The second stage, we start the light sleep. This is more, shows definitive change on that EEG. And then right here, this is where ideally your body is getting more and more ready for that deep, deep sleep. This also takes about 40 to 60% of the whole non-REM sleep cycle itself. Now, this is where you want to find that kind of fine line between what's considered a power nap. So if you can wake up during the power nap, this is where you still get some of that beneficial memory consolidation, and you tend to wake up feeling refreshed and not hungover. So that's why potentially long naps can leave you, especially if you wake up in the deepest state of non-REM, or REM can leave you feeling a little bit discombobulated, a little bit kind of with a little bit of a hangover type feeling, a little bit foggy. In general, these are associated with making way more room for learning. So kind of involved in what's called the memory transfer. So there's 2 parts of our brain that are involved in this. What's called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is kind of right in the center of the brain. And this part is really important for translating short-term memory to long-term memory. And the long-term memory should live more in the cortex. So kind of that big covering of the brain itself. So spindles themselves definitely impaired in some chronic disease states, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's as well. As we get older, we have less of ability to generate these really powerful spindles, and the amplitude or the actual size of these spindles can change over time as well. K complexes are associated with kind of when you get bumped when you're sleeping or an external stimuli, but you don't wake up. So you can elicit K complexes if someone's sleeping, especially in that N2 stage sleep, so not the deepest and not N1, right in between. If you brush up against someone during that time period, then you can elicit some K complexes on the EEG, which is not kind of neat. So can we stimulate brain waves of sleep? There are a few really progressive thinking people out there who have seen that sometimes some of these sedative, hypnotic sleep medicines in the long term aren't beneficial. We'll talk a little bit about that, but they're coming up with alternative ways to help people's sleep improve, especially people that are, approaching their 60s, where we really start to see that drop in these sleep spindles. So what they do is they first record your natural rhythm of your sleep, and they see where you are still producing these spindles. And what they basically input a really low voltage back into the brain itself, and this can alone elicit a stronger sleep spindle. And it's definitely been shown when they do the comparative studies that the people are able to retain better information when they're able to improve these sleep spindles. So pretty neat technology. Possibly in the future, it's not used. There are people out there making these devices that you can buy online, but they're not yet FDA approved. So deep delta wave sleep, very important. That's that N3 before we enter the REM sleep. And again, those high amplitude on the EEG, and very difficult to wake a person during this stage. Interestingly, people that sleepwalk, people that talk in their sleep, this is the state in which they're doing it. And if you do happen to wake up a sleepwalker, they have no recollection of dream, because this is not the dream state, which is our REM state. Okay, so most deep sleep occurs during the first 2 cycles of sleep. So again, in the first half of the night. And big take-homes is growth hormone is going to be released, and also an increase in glucose metabolism for memory as well. So, and also non-REM sleep is responsible for kind of helping those neurotransmitter receptors kind of recharge and do their thing for the next day. Changes in efficiency and non-REM sleep with age. So the nice thing is the typical teenager enjoys about 95% sleep efficiency. And by sleep efficiency, we mean how long you are actually asleep and stay asleep versus how many times you wake up during the night. So 95% is very good. We like to see people above 85 to 90% if we're talking about sound sleep efficiency. So by the time we reach our 80s, sleep efficiency is going to drop to 70% to 80%. So very typical, of course. Grandma wants to stay up a little bit later and make it up a little bit earlier, just because sleep can be difficult as we tend to age. The decline of non-REM sleep is already underway by late 20s and early 30s. So it's really that non-REM sleep, huge for motor development as a kid, so that when we're an infant learning to or trying to learn how to walk and crawl, that's where we see the most non-REM activity and those highest amounts of those sleep spindles, interestingly. By our 40s, we're stripped to from 60 to 70% of that deep non-REM sleep. And then by age 70, again, reduction of 80 to 90%. Why do we sleep? Integration, creativity, problem solving, and trauma. So these are the characteristics of the other most well-known function of aspect of sleep, and this is REM sleep, that rapid eye movement. So during this stage, our eyes move rapidly from side to side. And originally, before we had the technology to look into this, they believed that REM was based on how we were actually behaving in our dreams. So our eye movements were mirroring a dream state, which of course doesn't make a lot of sense if we think about it, but before they were able to actually look into the details of REM sleep, this was the thought. So believe it or not, while we're dreaming, we're looking much more like a wakeful state on imaging and on that EEG. So it looks like we are awake in so many different ways. And interestingly, the parts of the brain that are really that light up on an MRI are the visual spatial regions, the motor cortex, again that hippocampus, and the amygdala, which is really important in processing strong emotions. So it's thought to be one of our strongest ways that we process really emotional trauma and that sort of thing. So the emotional regions of the brain can be up to 30 times more active than when we are awake. But the lateral prefrontal cortex is deactivated. And this is the same part of your brain that gets deactivated when we drink alcohol. So it reduces our inhibitions, and we're able to really explore in our dreams potentially some of these more emotional charged events. Very interestingly, the neurotransmitter noradrenaline, a stress hormone, is almost absent despite all of this processing of our emotions. So some researchers believe that REM sleep really shows us that we can deal with some of our more subconscious problems on an emotional level and process it while we're sleeping, even if we're not necessarily recalling the dreams, because we're not going to recall all the dreams that we had. This can be viewed, some sleep researchers view it as a form of therapy while we're sleeping. Pretty cool. So in general, this author, his name is Matthew Walker. He's a PhD, one of the most well-known sleep scientists out there. A wonderful book called Why We Sleep, and he has numerous talks on YouTube that are super informative. And I like his definition, seeing non-REM as more of a reflection, the storing and strengthening of these raw ingredients. And then REM sleep is kind of integrating these, interconnecting our past, what we just learned, with our past, and really forming new ideas and how we perceive the world and how we navigate our lives. So sleep conditions and health implications, I'm going to go through just a couple of these. This is just a list of some sleep-wake disorders. So insomnia, of course, is going to be the most prevalent. Sleep apnea, we've learned so much more about sleep apnea and just how many people are affected, and interventions that can help make a huge difference when it comes to cardiovascular health, etc., when we really recognize and treat sleep apnea. And everything from restless leg syndrome and even different issues with certain types of sleep, like rapid eye movement sleep behavior disorder, when we can actually see some movement and some irregular patterns happening during that sleep. So insomnia, 30% of US adults suffer from some sort of acute situational insomnia, and about 10%, give or take, are experiencing really a chronic form of insomnia. And 40% of all insomnia patients are going to have a coexisting psychiatric condition. And there are some really fascinating studies looking at intervening, like at which level physicians tend to intervene. And if you go to complain or talk to your doctor about sleep, there's a really good chance that you might leave there with a prescription for either an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication before going to more of these sleep medicines as well. Narcolepsy, 1 out of every 2,000 people on some form, not to the degree that's portrayed in movies, of course, and over 3 million people worldwide. So affects women and men equally, and really you can carry the gene, but you may not manifest the condition itself. So 1 out of just 500 people actually manifest narcolepsy symptoms. And then only 20 to 25% of those with narcolepsy will manifest all 4 parameters, which is the daytime sleepiness, that sudden loss of muscle function that's again portrayed in movies so much, sleep paralysis, and also having legitimate hallucinations as well. Estimated that 75% of people suffering from narcolepsy remain undiagnosed. Sleep apnea. 48%, so about half the people in the US report snoring issues. 25 million in the US will suffer from obstructive sleep apnea, which is the most common form of sleep apnea. So there's obstructive and then there's central sleep apnea. And really the biggest thing to tease these apart is think of the obstructive sleep apnea as being more structural, so more that actual enclosure versus the and blockages that can occur in the diaphragm and the throat, and versus central sleep apnea, which it tends to be more neurological, can be connected to some chronic disease as well. Yes?
The sleep apnea and snoring connection, how can you correlate the two? Or if you snore, you don't
Necessarily have sleep apnea. That snore have sleep apnea? No. Really, this is what you have to do in order to really definitively know if you are legitimately suffering from some sort of apnea. And there are different degrees of apnea. And most of it will be found by a partner, because most people don't even know that they're waking so many times during the night. They can be very short awakenings, and you're not always coming to consciousness. So in general, to evaluate sleep apnea connection with some snoring, really need to do a sound sleep study, from what I know. Yeah. So polysomnogram is just a term for the sleep study. And during this time, they're going to measure your brain waves, also your breathing, also going to look at the motor patterns of your eyes, and a few other muscles as well, especially your diaphragm, and a lot of sensors that you're going to be hooked up to. It's a cool picture, kind of just illustrating the different aspects of the study. So big overview slide right here. In general, sleep deprivation can lead directly to depression and anxiety, diabetes, different types of cancer. The ones that have been studied the most are going to be the colon, breast, and prostate. Heart disease in numerous forms. Obesity increases the risk for stroke, and also cognitive decline. Interesting study on obesity and sleep. The only variable in this was sleep. And one group, University of Chicago, slept 5.5 hours, okay? And they all participated with the same calorie-restricted diet. And one group for 5.5 hours, and the other group slept for a robust 8.5 hours, which is really good sleep. The group that slept for at least 8 hours a night lost 55% more body fat, with all the other remaining factors staying constant. So in general, inadequate sleep impacts secretion of many hormones, but certainly ghrelin and leptin, which are kind of like a balance. So ghrelin increases a lot of appetite, and leptin is known as our satiety hormone. So paying attention to leptin and ghrelin hormones can make we can measure those, and we can really see if those are out of balance. Very interesting study. Every year there's an experiment done on 1.6 billion people in 70 countries. So daylight savings time soon enough will be falling back, right? So interestingly, falling back, gaining that hour of sleep is associated with a decrease of 21% reduction in myocardial infarctions, so heart attack, that following day, following the falling back. Isn't that amazing statistics? And it equals in the other proportions. So the following day of springing ahead and losing an hour of sleep, hospitals report an increase of 24% in heart attacks. So that 1 hour of sleep, or that early awakening in the susceptible person, can make a big difference on cardiovascular health. Natural killer cells. So our immune system are armed with natural killer cells, responsible for taking care of cancer cells, viruses, bacteria, part of what's known as our innate immune system, kind of one of our first line of defenses. So study with 23 subjects, so not a huge study, and sleep was restricted for just one single night. They cut it in half to 4 hours of sleep, and this led to a 70% on average drop in these natural killer cells. So pretty phenomenal when we think of what long-term this can do to our immune status. And I thought this was really funny. I just found it when I was searching through these research articles. The effect of mirthful, so joyful laughter on stress and natural killer cell activity. And all the parameters were where the people just watched a humorous video, and then they made the other group watch a video of a tourism-based video, so a boring video. And that was it. And interestingly, all the laughter itself, so laugh and sleep are really beneficial for boosting our natural killer cells. Shift work. So amazing amount of the population participate in some sort of shift work, either at night or actually through the evening as well. So up to 15 to 20%. And in 2007, shift work itself was classified as a group 2A carcinogen. So on the carcinogen list, that's not very high, but it's still considered a carcinogen, which is very interesting because there are definite studies that show that an increase, especially in those cancers, the breast, the colon, and the prostate, do increase with ongoing shift work. So for every 5 years that a woman's of shift work, a woman's chance for developing breast cancer increases by nearly 4%. And most of these studies were done like in a hospital setting where nurses are working in quite these different shifts, some warehouse settings as well. And in general, we can think of it as circadian misalignment. So this will lead to those higher levels of cancer, diabetes, and potentially heart disease as well. Angiogenesis, so helping to work against cancer proliferation in the body, and immune regulation. So anything we can do to make sure we're getting the right amount of melatonin released at the appropriate time of night is only going to protect against many issues, especially something as serious as cancer. Melatonin receptors all over the body, and more than 400 times more melatonin in our GI tract than our brain. And the evolution of this gut-brain axis, we're learning more and more every year and every day. But there's a lot to be said there about the role of melatonin in the body. So there's some conflicting evidence in research as far as melatonin for both sleep onset and sleep maintenance. And sleep maintenance itself, melatonin does not play a large role at all. So you can use the analogy of melatonin being more involved at setting the stage for sleep. So if we use the analogy of a race, like a track race beforehand, we can think of melatonin as the referee with the gun that kind of lines all the other players of sleep up to initiate the sleep. But as far as those extended release melatonins that you see out there, the research shows that melatonin itself more important for that initiating sleep, and not so much even when people wake up during the middle of the night. That second dose of melatonin in the research hasn't shown to be very, very beneficial.
Can I ask a question about supplementing with melatonin?
Yes.
How it affects your natural production of melatonin, where your body can get used to getting this supplement, and you say, hey, I don't need to make that much.
Yeah.
And you stop producing as much.
And there is a lot of concern in children too with supplementing with melatonin, the idea that we would suppress that production of their own melatonin as they grow. And I'd say it's another area where there's a little bit conflicting evidence as far as reducing our endogenous ability to make that melatonin. So in general, the average person makes, I believe, between 0.5 and 1 milligram equivalent of a supplemental dose. And the typical supplement recommendations tend to be between that 1 to 3 to 5 milligram range. So as far as suppressing our own melatonin release itself, I don't believe it to be suppressive from what I've read, but it's definitely something that is debatable out there. And people, especially in the young population, not sure if children long-term should be supplementing with melatonin. Yeah, you're welcome. So very interesting when it comes to supplementation, and this is why places like Coastal Pharmacy that vet their products is extremely important. We look into actually what's contained, is that crazy amount, 83%, so less than 30% of the supplements tested contain the labeled dose of the melatonin, with 83% being less and 478% being more than advertised on that label. So the quality of melatonin supplementation, you really have to make sure you're getting a quality product. And there are different forms of melatonin out there as well. How does this affect us on a broad level? So sleeping and the economy. GDP Amazing amount. So 2.8% of the US GDP is thought to be lost to issues with sleep. So sleep deprivation, sleep issues, etc. And that equals about $411 billion per year. And pretty wild stuff. So that idea that money never sleeps, that was coined by this guy, Michael Douglas, in what is it? Name the movie. Anyone? Trivia?
Wall Street?
Yes. Wall Street. Nailed it. So interestingly, that idea that, early bird gets the worm, get after it early, we know that if sleep-deprived people strictly do not perform. There's reproducible studies that if we cut off sleep at certain times of the night, especially that early morning, we can definitely see a drop-off in performance along all parameters. I like this title. I think if I could have a second job, it would be creating titles for some of these studies. Social loafing under fatigue. So they did a study looking at how groups participated together within themselves when they were either rested or sleep deprived. And when people were sleep deprived, they tend to really step back from responsibility when it came to group projects. So in that work environment, when you're working with others, if you are dealing with some sleep deprivation, then you might be able to tell who those people are sleep deprived. I mean, there are many factors, of course, out there, but I thought it was a very interesting study. So also an interesting study showing deviance. So those who slept 6 hours or less significantly had a tendency to do kind of smaller lies at the workplace. So I thought that was an interesting study. And 40% of U.S. business managers report getting less than 6 hours of sleep per night, which is pretty significant. And Cornell University just surveyed, this is a survey not just on sleep, it was on happiness overall. And if people had the choice between getting adequate amount of sleep and making less money, or working these night shifts and working overtime and making more money and only getting 6 hours of sleep, believe it or not, the majority of people chose that option number B, so that $140,000. So it says a lot about our society at large. Sleep, this was super interesting. So 80% of public schools start before 8:15 in the morning, with 20% starting before 7:20. And a century ago, most schools were starting around 9 a.m. And this meant that kids could wake up without an alarm clock. And why this is important is because during those teenage years, specifically, teenagers still need anywhere from up to 9 hours of sleep to really have those beneficial things occur. And the teenager itself, they tend to shift their circadian rhythm a little bit forward. So teenagers not wanting to go to bed early with their parents is actually a natural thing. And their natural circadian rhythm at that age tends to shift forward anywhere from 2 to 3 hours versus an adult. And so them waking up closer to that 9 o'clock time is much more in rhythm with their natural cycle. And there have been some really neat studies out there. So with this, what they did was they disrupted different parts of sleep, and especially that REM sleep. So they went through those sleep cycles and they had them hooked up to their electrodes. And what they did, anytime the person started to go into that REM sleep, they woke them up, they made them do some math problems, stimulated them, and for over the 5 to 10 minute period, and then they let them go back to sleep, and they started to initiate their deep sleep, and eventually when they got to the REM sleep again, they would do this cycle again. So they interrupted them like 4 or 5 times per night to not get REM sleep. And by the third day, participants were looking not so hot. So exhibiting anxiety, irritability. Some people were even on the verge of psychosis and hallucination. So that REM sleep, really so nourishing for our nervous system to really process emotions, help with mental stability. If that gets disrupted, even with all that, even with getting non-REM sleep, it's a huge deal when it comes to these sort of factors. And who gets their REM sleep disrupted all the time when they're waking up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning to go to sleep are these young kids, these teenagers. So it's if schools are really looking to improve how kids feel throughout the day, especially in those mental health parameters, it'd be great for them to start looking at some of these statistics. And there have been some studies actually showing this. So Minnesota in particular, high school out there, they took their top 10% of students and they measured SAT scores. And they did it the year at the normal, so they were going to school at 7:15, and then a year later, and it was a big deal because you can imagine all that goes into the other school systems, coordinating athletic events, etc., parents, transportation, but they decided to catch on to some of the research and experiment and see what if they started school at 8:40. So, you know, about a little bit more than an hour from their original start time. And amazingly, one statistic that stood out was their SAT score jumped from a 1200 to almost a 1300 to a 1500. And since then, multiple schools have reproduced studies like this and have seen dramatic changes in not only SAT scores and performance, but also detentions, mental health parameters, and so forth. And one really important area that they saw a reduction, this is in Tenton County, Wyoming, is a reduction in car crashes in that population, in that adolescent population, those high school teenagers, by 70%. And that was over the span of about 5 years, so it wasn't a short study. And to put that in perspective, anti-lock brakes reduce rates of car crashes, actual accidents, by 25%. So that's a huge, huge, huge win. Dangers of sleep deprivation, just a few quick facts. So every hour, someone dies in a traffic accident in the US due to some fatigue-related error. In the life, 30% of drivers at some point during the life might nod off at the wheel. And it might be transient, but still significant enough to possibly create a car accident scenario. Over 100,000 deaths, and this is in total, can be possibly attributed to medical errors due to sleep deprivation. And then per year, 100,000 car accidents are associated with tiredness and deprivation. And incidents such as the Challenger space shuttle explosion and even Chernobyl, when they've done those in-depth reviews, have shown some aspect of fatigue and sleep deprivation really setting these things in motion, which is crazy to think about. So important to sleep the night before learning, very important. So if you have a task to learn, getting adequate sleep the night before, extremely important. They've done study after study showing this. So even getting a nap, so that 90-minute nap or so where we're still going to see some of those sleep spindles, so those spindles that are very much involved in that deep non-REM sleep that we'll experience in the first half of sleep, really, really important. So they had two groups, nap versus no nap, and all they did was have them face match 100 pairs and see how many of these they could remember, the picture to the name itself. So at 6 p.m., they did another 100 face name to evaluate, and the only thing that was different is one group napped in between and one did not. And it was a 20% increase in learning by the group that napped. And again, those spindle bursts are really what shows to have that restoration for learning and that clearing space in what's called that hippocampus part of the brain. So again, 40% reduction in sleep spindles in seniors compared to young, healthy adults. And very, very important that interesting, sleep spindles also have a large influx in the late morning hours between REM sleep. So we do see it throughout the night, but they also sandwich themselves into the later morning hours during REM sleep. So why you don't want to pull an all-nighter. So don't make sure you sleep the night after learning. And this is all about that memory transfer from that hippocampus to the cortex itself. And again, in general, performance seems to increase for the people that sleep by 20 to 40%. And if you think about that as far as grade average is concerned, that can be huge for students. So not always a good idea to pull the all-nighter. And just a quick illustration, so hippocampus to that neocortex, that's really the goal of getting that restorative sleep. Also physical performance. So some right-handed individuals learned a certain sequence with their left hand. And then they either they either slept or didn't sleep. It's a 12-hour break total, and between that break, half the group slept and half the group remained awake. And again, 35% increase in accuracy and 20% increase in speed compared to the group that actually did not get some sleep. And this begs the question again when it comes to sports injuries and Olympics, why should we train early in the morning? Should we allow athletes to get up, get a full night's sleep, and not have those 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning football practices? How much are we trying to protect the kids as far as injury is concerned? Studies have shown that you're 1.7 times more likely to be injured with less than 8 hours of sleep, and the time to that physical exhaustion is 10 to 20% less. That's a basketball player named Andre Iguodala, plays for the Golden State Warriors. They hooked him up to basic sleep study parameters every single night during the season. He wore a sleep tracker, essentially. And when he was able to get full 8 hours of sleep, those parameters increased. So minutes played, that's definitely an outside variable, but 29% increased in points per minute, 2% in three-point percentage, which is huge for 3 points percentage, and 9% increase in free throws, which is also very significant. When you got less than 8 hours of sleep, an increase in turnovers and an increase in fouls committed. So those fouls committed, maybe that irritability, being angry, created some fouls. So sleep and sex hormones. Small study, group of 10 people, and they just sleep restricted to 5 hours, but for a week straight. So you can only imagine a week straight, 5 hours of sleep is going to be pretty rough. But 10 to 15% reduction in testosterone. So pretty phenomenal there. Sleep medicines and more. These are the hypnotic sedatives, and most of these are only approved for about a month or so, about 35 days. So really for that short-term acute insomnia. And what the author of the book I referred to, Matthew Walker, spoke about time and time again is that while these can put someone to sleep, the rhythm and the waves that it produces is very much unnatural. And the same can be said about things like Benadryl. So anecdotally, especially Benadryl, that antihistamine that crosses the blood-brain barrier, that itself can really help people get to sleep. But as far as sleep fragmentation, waking up per night, and the levels of different deep wave sleep, it certainly is not a natural form of sleep for the majority. And a lot of the stuff is habit forming as well. So like any medication, they certainly have a role for the right fit, but long term, we really would love to discover underlying issues why people aren't sleeping. Benzodiazepines, so those are common anti-anxiety medications that I see a lot of people prescribe for sleep, and it might just be as needed. So a couple times per week, they might use it as something that can help them get into more of a sedated state. Again, benzodiazepines have not been shown to increase any of those good parameters of non-REM sleep that we're really looking for that restoration. And interestingly, of course, there's a huge issue with tolerance and dependence on some of these medications, especially the benzodiazepines, and some of them do have risks or are linked to early onset dementia and a lot of other things that we would definitely like to avoid. All right, so the nightcap, alcohol before bed. Again, anecdotally, a lot of people report it helps them get to sleep. It's the only thing that allows them to get to sleep. Similar theme here in that it causes this fractionated sleep, impairs transport of tryptophan, which is an essential amino acid that is very important for serotonin production, and it also really suppresses that REM sleep in particular. So especially when you've had a little bit too much and there's that byproduct known as aldehydes and ketones that are only going to cause a little bit of disruption in the neurological system. And interestingly, alcoholics who are drinking every day and really suppressing this REM sleep, they might have a rebound effect and experience their own form of psychosis or hallucinations. That's very well documented if you keep suppressing that REM sleep with alcohol. paid to go ahead and get drunk, and on average they gave them 2 to 3 shots of vodka, and one, basically they did 2 different parts. So there was a control group, and then there was a group that got drunk the first night after learning, so right away. And then they gave another group kind of a 2-night head start, so they didn't actually get drunk until the 3rd night after. And interestingly, again, the take home is that drinking has really tough effects on learning. Okay, sleep helps your brain take out the trash. So this is that glymphatic system I wanted to talk to you guys about. It was discovered around 2010 or so, really fascinating. Before this time, we didn't really know how the brain really relieves itself of any metabolic or environmental detoxification at night. So we know we have the lymphatic system, kind of part of our immune system, part of really waste management throughout the body, helps to recycle old red blood cells. Now, the glymphatic system itself, we knew that there's something going on during sleep because really metabolically the brain only reduces by about 25%. So what is it trying to do? It's trying to create space in the brain to clear things, especially things like beta amyloid plaque. So this is what's hallmark of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So we know that there's kind of this chicken and egg possibly connection between sleep, Alzheimer's, and the ability for the brain to clear out some of this beta amyloid. There are many factors, genetic factors as well, that come into play when it comes to Alzheimer's. So what does it do? The interstitial fluid space, so that can actually carry the flow of what's called your cerebral spinal fluid, shrinks by up to 70%. So it creates a lot of room in there to help flush stuff through. And it's not only, again, environmental stuff, but it's some of our own metabolic byproducts. And interestingly, in rat studies, beta amyloid clearance was most efficient in lateral and supine positions, with prone being on your stomach being the least effective for helping to clear beta amyloid. So not only for the neck, but maybe another reason not to sleep in a prone position on your stomach is to reduce the effect of that glymphatic system. Tons of studies out there. It's probably one of the most fascinating new revolutions in neuroscience is this glymphatic system, and what we can do to improve it, and why people's glymphatic systems seem to slow down in certain disease processes. So a quick illustration of a young person versus a person that's healthy but a little bit older versus someone with Alzheimer's disease, and just the amount of the metabolic waste and beta amyloid that's being able to be cleared out here on this side, which is the vein where it's eventually going to connect to our lymphatic flow. Quick tips for utilizing that glymphatic system. So first thing we can do is sleep. So if we're not sleeping, we're not going to utilize the glymphatic system. It quite frankly doesn't work pretty much at all. Very, very tiny percentage of something that resembles glymphatic system is happening when we are awake. So this is strictly a part of our sleep cycle. Don't get a concussion. So interestingly, concussions have slowed down glymphatic system dramatically, like 75% slowed it down for up to 30 days post-concussion. So in general, not good to get a concussion. I'd say don't chemically concuss yourself, because things like aspartame, MSG, these are neuroexcitatory, and what this does is essentially is a little bit of a chemical concussion if you're doing this stuff on the regular. So unfortunately, we know that people with a variant of what's called the ApoE or the APOE, which is part of a lipoprotein, so part of fat transport in the body and in the brain, if they have a certain variation of this gene, then they have a tendency for early onset Alzheimer's potentially, and then also, not early onset, I'm sorry, just Alzheimer's in general, and then have more of a difficulty making this, clearing the beta amyloid in general. Stabilize blood sugar and cortisol, only going to help throughout the night. So melatonin, there's a doctor, practicing doctor out there that treats a lot of chronic illness named Dr. Klinghardt. He talks a lot about melatonin being prepared liposomally and sometimes in pretty heroic doses. So it's not uncommon in the integrative world to see up to 20 milligrams. I've heard of up to 50 milligrams of melatonin being used, especially in people with cancer diagnosis and some more chronic diseases as well. So when it's prepared liposomally, which just means with a fat, it can potentially, and this is kind of theoretical in my opinion, get into some of the neurological tissue a little bit deeper and do its thing. So other compounds that are of interest with helping the glymphatic system work a little bit better: Chinese skullcap, which is an herb; propolis, it actually comes from, it's a resin component of the byproduct of when bees interact with making their honey; and olive oil. So those are things, and then making sure that you just have good overall alignment in the lymphatic area and the neck area, so working with a good person that does structural work. Glucose and hormones, sleep stabilizers or sleep disruptors. So when someone comes in, they tell me they have an issue with sleep, and I know it's not something that they're staying up on their iPad all night, that they're not exercising at 9 o'clock at night. Well, that's ties in with cortisol. But we know that sugar handling during sleep can be absolutely huge. So if you have a little bit of an issue with stabilization of sugar throughout the night, and you get low sugar and it dips too low around 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, then this is going to tell the body to produce some cortisol, which is known as our stress hormone, and this can wake people up in the middle of the night, especially if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're hungry or you kind of feel a little bit on edge. So that's a sign that blood sugar regulation might not be optimal. Short-term fix is really like a reactive hypoglycemia type of diet, so smaller meals throughout the day. And some people will suggest doing like a slow digesting carbohydrate or even a protein at night to keep, before you go to bed, to keep sugars stable. Now that's not a good long-term solution. We want to get someone back, if possible, to be able to have that have that meal at 6 or 7 o'clock at the latest and still be able to maintain their glucose throughout the night. Those other two hormones we mentioned earlier, leptin and ghrelin, these certainly can disrupt sleep, and they certainly can be disrupted as a result of sleep itself, especially leptin. So doing anything that we can, especially in the realm of exercise and making sure that we're eating really healthy foods, can eventually help leptin come back into balance. There's a diet out there called the leptin reset, and principles of leptin reset: fat and protein in the morning upon awakening, so between like 7 to 8 o'clock, and then making sure that you're not eating after 6 o'clock. And that alone has been shown to help reset leptin levels in the body. This is our normal cortisol curve throughout the day. So cortisol is produced by the adrenal glands. Those glands sit on the top of the kidneys, and the adrenal glands also supply epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline as well. But one of the hormones that the cortex produces is cortisol. And we want people, when they wake up in the morning, to have good high levels of cortisol, and we want that to stay relatively even keel throughout, especially that first half of the day. And gradually we want the cortisol to drop off at night to help us fall to sleep, because there's a direct inverse relationship with cortisol and melatonin. So as that cortisol goes down at night, we want melatonin to rise. And one of the most common things I see every day is people with irregularities in their cortisol kind of levels throughout the day. So they wake up exhausted, they have their lunch, and then they're even more exhausted, and they might reach for like a coffee or something that's sugar-based. And then at night, depending on what stage of fatigue they're in, sometimes you can see a second wind. And that sign of a second wind around, say, 8, 9, 10 o'clock, the people that say, I do my best work 8, 9 o'clock, I feel like I want to exercise at 9 o'clock, that's a good sign that cortisol rhythm, circadian rhythm really, and also potentially sugar handling is out of whack. So those are really good signs. You might want to look into those parameters if you see that pattern happening over time. We know, I have a lovely partner who's a naturopathic doctor as well, and she does mostly hormone stuff, and I'm definitely not an expert in hormones, so she was kind enough to help me prepare this slide. But in general, estrogen and progesterone, as they drop, are going to have some effect on sleep. So beyond the hot flashes themselves, of course, we do know that both serotonin and GABA take a hit. So progesterone seems to be a relaxing hormone in general, especially around nighttime. So some people will treat insomnia in the right person with some progesterone, either topically or orally, if the person wants to do bioidenticals, and can see good changes in sleep. And estrogen itself, as that falls, serotonin production tends to drop as well. And serotonin can make a huge difference when it comes to sleep. Quick overview slide on some things that can be beneficial for menopause and sleep. So botanicals that can make a difference for hormone regulation. Hot flashes sometimes can respond beautifully to vitamin E at adequate doses. And then protein, the gamma oryzanol is a protein that's been implicated to help with hot flashes as well. And diet, super important to get those phytoestrogen containing foods like soy, flax seeds, alfalfa, celery, etc. Light, so big topic of conversation is light at night. So ideally, before the invent of light bulbs, etc., we really were in more of a rhythm with nature. And these blue lights, these LEDs, time and time again, studies have shown that it dramatically not only reduces melatonin output and delays it up to 3 hours, but it also not only delays melatonin issues, but it does disrupt those rhythms of sleep, that deep sleep and the REM sleep as well. So they did a study, 5 nights in a row. Basically, a person read a book, and only a book. They didn't do any browsing, anything that would raise dopamine and other parameters, so just some general reading from an iPad versus a paper book. And the studies are pretty remarkable as far as reduction in melatonin and also that delay in output as well. So anything we can do to reduce that blue light at night, a lot of recommendations out there. There are very good apps on the phone. You can buy those goofy glasses that have a yellow or a red tint to really help to get the blue light out of your vision as well. EMFs in sleep, I just put a very brief slide. I think every day we're learning more and more about potential risks of exposure to electromagnetic fields and radiation. There's definitely not definitive, good, reproducible studies out there yet, especially in the human models. But in general, too much of it, too close to our body all the time is probably not a good thing in many parameters. So in general, sleep hygiene suggestion, if you can keep the phone outside of the bedroom, it could only be a positive thing. I've heard many people talk about when they take especially if you have like a Wi-Fi router right outside of your bedroom. Some people talk about the electrical companies, they have those smart meters, and if those are right outside of the bedroom wall, anecdotally, again, online, there's a lot of people that talk about when they did take care of this issue, their sleep turned around immediately. So one of those things that we'll learn more about, that's a little bit controversial, but fun. So I'm going to fly, but integrative therapies to sleep in general. So I do want to talk to you about this chart here. This is the naturopathic therapeutic order, and really want to show that we want to start here, establishing the foundation for optimal health, because all the wonderful medicines that we have, all the wonderful supplementation, and some of these more high force interventions, if we're not doing things on a fundamental level, getting adequate sleep, again, diet, movement, helping our circadian rhythm work better, then a lot of the other things don't work as well. So, and we kind of go up this order in an ideal situation when we're working with a person. So we might not start with like drug therapy if we can avoid it. Sometimes you have to intervene there, but we'd love to start at the foundation and then stimulate the body's natural healing power. So it sounds a little out there, but that's looking at the therapies like even something as gentle as contrast showers, meditation, acupuncture, homeopathy. All these things kind of lie within the realm of helping the body kind of come back into balance if you just give it a little bit of a nudge. And then actually supporting the weakened systems. So if someone's dealing with sleep, one person can come come in with a sleep issue, and it really can be a blood sugar handling issue, and that's it. If we get that under control, they're going to sleep better. Other person might come in and they are going through a heck of a time in their personal life right now. There's some sort of ongoing conflict, and that way, of course, we need to support that mental emotional state, which will also be that nervous system as well. So it makes a big difference kind of knowing where the person is at. And then using targeted natural prescriptions. So this would be, we call it green allopathy, which is a term for, sometimes we just use an herb for a condition. So this herb is good for that. So ideally we're working on all the fundamentals, trying to remove the issues with the person, what's causing them to be unwell. And then, but if we need to use more targeted natural therapeutics, we can do that at the same time. And as we go up more in the realm of more the conventional model of actually replacing physiology or using a drug to actually push physiology in a certain direction. And of course, surgery is a pretty high force intervention. So this is a chart I made up. Basically, when someone walks in and they have a sleep issue, I do think about all these parameters. So looking at if they are dealing with an acute stress conflict, if they have some HPA axis dysfunction based on how they say their day goes, they could be having a really bad infection in their GI tract that we know over time can really mess up neurotransmitter production. As we learn more about this gut-brain axis, they might be dealing with some food intolerances that are contributing to that infection or that dysbiosis, which means it's just an overgrowth of the wrong type of bacteria. And then this can always, of course, we know that inflammation is kind of hallmark to all things that go wrong in the body. I really like this picture. This is from a book called The Swiss Secret to Optimal Health. A medical doctor named Thomas Rau that I really respect. He practices more integrative medicine. He calls it biological medicine. And in general, we look at these things so we all are given a barrel, and that can be viewed as our genetics. So some people have different genetic predispositions. So we all know people that can go out to the casino, have a large pizza, smoke a cigarette, have a little whiskey. They wake up the next day and they do it over and over again. And I'm not one of those people, and I'm jealous of the people that are. And yeah, there's not as many hardy people out there nowadays as it feels like they were in my grandparents' generation, who still, I'd say my grandparents are more wild than me some days. But aside, point being is everyone's barrel will fill up at different rates, and really doing everything we can to remove any stress from this barrel in the form of food, in the wrong of sometimes things in the environment like heavy metals, stress, maybe the wrong type of diet, and we all get exposed to different bacteria, viruses, etc. So anything we can do to work against that is really important. So when someone comes in, we might look as comprehensive as this. So a really good physical exam, a neurological exam to make sure we're not missing anything glaring. Basic laboratory work, and I always like to do a complete iron panel, thyroid, because if someone has a malfunctioning or dysfunctioning thyroid, that alone can cause a lot of issues with fatigue and sleep. So making sure everything looks good there. We're learning more and more about nutrients like vitamin D and zinc and how these contribute to overall health and immunity. And then we'll sometimes do more of these functional testings to really see what's going on in the GI tract, because we know it's kind of all connected to our health. And we know that some things in the environment, if we happen to have a mouthful of silver amalgams, which we know are 50% mercury, or we are living in a moldy situation, we know that over time this can really mess up physiology in the bottle, and we can give them all the herbs and the melatonin and the wonderful sleep products out there, and if we don't address these things, then it will only be treatment, at best treatment-based, symptom-based treatment, I'm sorry. So foundation of health, diets that I think work very well for stabilizing blood sugar, etc., are going to be more in the realm of that Paleolithic, and then there's an autoimmune Paleolithic diet out there that's been popularized. So big take-homes from most of these diets is they're going to be avoiding foods that a good majority of the population might be allergic or sensitive to some degree, even if you're not manifesting really gross GI symptoms. And gut and psychology syndrome is a book and also a diet, very, very fascinating about the connection, again, of our microbiome, of the health of our GI tract, and how that manifests on the mental, emotional level in brain health. So that looks like a lot of bone broth, again, like a Paleolithic type of diet. blood type diet, I've definitely seen type O and A benefit from these type of implementations. So type O tends to be more of a paleo diet, more benefiting from red meat, really avoiding wheat and dairy in particular. Type A can get away with a lot more wheat-containing foods, vegetarian-based. So there's not wonderful research in that realm, and the book's really compelling at times, but it's something to look into and experiment with. And the blood type diet itself, most people are eating a whole foods diet when they transition to a blood type diet, which is always a plus. And avoiding all the bad stuff. So we know that those neuroexcitatory compounds like the MSG and the aspartame dyes are probably not good for our neurological health. And what did I do here as well? So, and timing. Overeating late at night is also associated with poor sleep. Quick slide, I'm going to skip through this, just the role of the microbiome on insomnia, circadian disturbance, and more and more scientists are looking into this. And also possible just essential supplementation that I can't put a true number on it, but maybe 70+% of people that are living in our modern world might benefit from some baseline supplementation. Especially we know magnesium deficiency is a real thing, and people can respond beautifully, and how they respond to stress and bowel motility, etc. with magnesium. Omega-3 fatty acid supplementation to help that ratio of good fat to bad fat. Sometimes fat-soluble vitamins. We don't always get enough of these in our diet. Back in the day when people ate a lot of organ meats, we got more of these fat-soluble vitamins, and they're very important for our immune system. And then multi-mineral vitamin, and some sort of really broad-spectrum anti-inflammatory, depending on who the person is, if they have a tendency towards arthritis, aches and pains, or more allergies. Sometimes you can really see nice changes in overall function, and that can add up to sleep with some of these interventions. And a good probiotic. Quick slide on homeopathy, because I do really like homeopathy. In general, homeopathy is almost 200 years old, and it's a little far out to explain, but you're using very dilute substances, and in the crude form, a lot of these things would be poison. We wouldn't want to give arsenicum album, which is the metal arsenicum, in a crude state to someone, because it would create a lot of issues, of course. But the homeopathic dilutions are really more of an energetic medicine to some point. So we mostly prescribe them what's called C dilutions, and the C stands for 1 to 100, and these can go up to typically dose 12C to 30C to 200C. And with homeopathy, the reason I wanted to devote a slide to it is it's very individualized. So one person with insomnia or sleep issues might use a totally different remedy than another person, and really working with a good classical homeopath or someone that focuses on homeopathy, I've seen it make a really amazing difference for the right type of person. Chinese medicine, again, similar to homeopathy, whether it be acupuncture, herbs, qigong, or tai chi. There's some really nice studies when it comes to stress relief, sleep, etc. So these are just a quick explanation. Like some acupuncturists, they're really trying to evaluate your whole pattern in your body, and one insomnia is going to be treated totally different than a different type of pattern. So worth doing a little investigation. So in general, anything we can do to reduce our stress, our day-to-day. So whether that's deep breathing techniques, whether that's going for a walk with your dog or your loved one, all these things really do raise those beneficial hormones in our bodies and create better biochemistry. And the less stress we have in our life, the less adrenaline, the appropriate amounts of that cortisol, that stress hormone, and any stress and stress reduction techniques. It's really practice makes perfect. And common sense stuff, so those caffeines, alcohol, soda, breathing technique called 4-4-8 breathing. I've also seen 4-7-8. So the first 4 stands for inhalation, so 4 seconds in, and then we do 4 seconds of holding our breath, and then a nice long exhale. And within 5-10 minutes tops, if you do this consistently, I did it before I spoke tonight, it can really make a big difference. So guided meditation, binaural beats is a technology that's out there. there that is purported to help get into better brain rhythms. So all neat stuff to investigate in. Cofactors. So quick slide on this is just looking at how we, sorry. And let's present that again. Try to get that out of there, but basically tryptophan, very important precursor, essential amino acid, meaning we do need to get it from our diet, helps to cross the blood-brain barrier and create 5-HTP, which can be taken as a supplement itself, precursor to serotonin, and serotonin is a direct precursor to melatonin. So outside, making sure we have our nutrition in place, so we're getting all of these cofactors, so zinc, B1 is thiamine, P5P is vitamin B6, calcium, P3 is niacin. So at different steps, you can see that we need different cofactors. And best way to do this, of course, is diet for some people, due to if they're not absorbing properly. Just one of these cofactors can make a huge difference. Maybe it's magnesium, maybe it's zinc. Something like SAMe, definitely want to work with a practitioner with, but that can make a nice difference with the right person as well. Nutritional support, again, magnesium does so many wonderful things in the body. So it relaxes smooth muscle, calms that autonomic nervous system, so less tendency to that kind of fight or flight tendency. Also, just there are clinical trials showing that it improves sleep efficiency, which is the sleep time, and decreasing the time it takes to fall asleep as well, and reducing early morning awakenings. Glycine, also an amino acid, can be really, really good for sleep maintenance. Also some studies out there for glycine used in people with more of an obsessive compulsive disorder sort of tendency. So it has to be a little bit high. 3 grams is a good dose for some supplements, but definitely has some good evidence. And theanine, so you can get some theanine from green tea, puts that body more into that alpha state, so that first state before we fall asleep, so more of that relaxation state. Enhances both GABA, that relaxation neurotransmitter, and serotonin as well. Phosphatidylserine is a really interesting molecule that can really help with that cortisol response, and there's only so many natural supplements out there that have been really shown to blunt that high cortisol level at night in a really consistent way, safely. And phosphatidylserine, it can be derived from soy. It does a few different things. Phosphatidylcholine is another type of phospholipid, and these are really good at helping protect the integrity of really all of our cell membranes, but especially in our nervous system. And again, 5-HTP, using it as a sleep enhancer, especially if people have issues with some sort of level of depression. Sometimes it can be effective. 5-HTP also can help with a certain type of motility. So if people have a bowel motility, so some forms of constipation can respond nicely to 5-HTP as well. So it does a couple of really nice things in the body, increases REM sleep, decreases time getting to sleep, and again, awakening as well. Just another look at that slide. This is just an example of what I consider to be a pretty decent supplement that can help with sleep, not only sleep onset, but possibly sleep maintenance as well. So it's got vitamin B6, which maybe you recall is going to be one of those cofactors for serotonin production, and then also melatonin. Valerian root. So valerian root's one of those herbs that, one, it smells, so you have to tolerate the smell, and two, some people can have what's known as a paradoxical effect, where it can actually increase wakefulness. So it's one of these things where you have to really test it out with a practitioner to know whether or not it does have that good sedative effect. And a lot of these herbs as well that we're going to go through briefly do a lot of this, have a lot of overlap. And it has that L-theanine for GABA, 5-HTP, and a little bit of melatonin, or a lot of it for some people. I figured we'd talk a little bit about CBD and eventually THC, so mixed bag of results as far as efficacy for sleep itself, especially CBD. So what I see in general is CBD working half the amount of time for not only sleep, but a lot of other parameters that people are trying to change, like the anxiety and the pain. Very, very dose dependent. Sometimes you have to go a lot higher than what's typically recommended on, say, the back of a bottle. But there are some positive studies out there showing that CBD alone can have some effect on sleep quality. Usually the combination of CBD plus THC, definitely anecdotally, people that are users of marijuana can say they really need it essentially to help maybe with onset, especially. But clinically, studies have shown that using a little bit of THC can definitely makes a better difference when it comes to quality of different sleep as well. Neat study showing that, small study, 17 people, just a small trial, is that it really helped with autonomic tone during night and did reflectively help with people with sleep apnea. And non-structural based things we can do for sleep apnea, especially if it's that obstructive sleep apnea, is pretty phenomenal. So quick list of herbs that I think have some role in helping to bring that nervous system to a point of better sleep. Ashwagandha, and we'll talk about a few of these one by one. Catnip, believe it or not, chamomilla, hops, kava kava, lavender, lemon balm, magnolia, oat, passion flower, red clover, St. John's wort, form of skullcap, and then also valerian root. So passion flower in particular, really good for people that are restless, a lot of racing thoughts at night. Also helps to convert unhealthy levels of glutamate, which is neuroexcitatory, to GABA, which is really important for that relaxation. Lavender, a lot of people are familiar with lavender in different forms, especially essential oil, but taking it actually internally in a safe form can be really, really good for a lot of that insomnia, especially if there's exhaustion that's accompanying it as well. So ashwagandha, very well known, really in general, good, similar to that phosphatidylserine, and also another herb called magnolia at really reducing that or balancing out that cortisol response. Also does some really nice things for the immune system. The same cells that are involved in HIV and AIDS, called CD4 cells, ashwagandha itself has shown to promote healthy levels of CD4 cells. So it does a lot of wonderful things in the body. Magnolia, a lot of overlap between magnolia, ashwagandha, and L-theanine in regard to that cortisol. Also has some effect on acetylcholine levels, which will help with memory and learning, and is also something that can act on those cannabinoid receptors. Chamomilla, very, very good for the GI tract along with the nervous system. So if there's any connection there where stomach stuff, especially gas and bloating and that gastritis picture is keeping someone at night, it can be really nice. But in general, it's really calming. This is just an example of a proprietary blend of different botanicals that I've certainly seen make a huge difference. I personally take this as needed. It's pretty good stuff, but all Latin names, so that's a little bit tough, but California poppy. Avena sativa is milky oat seed, and milky oats in general, really good herb for a worn out nervous system. The person who's been in a trauma, like a car accident, they really can't stop shaking, like that sort of presentation. Avena sativa milky oat seed can make a huge difference over time to bringing their nervous system back to a more stable state. It does have some catnip, passion flower, skullcap, as well as cordalis, which the reason why it says current valid license required is because of that cordalis, because you have to use it in low dose. Sleep hygiene, keeping it simple. That's what my 7th grade social studies teacher always said, kiss, kiss, kiss. Stick to a sleep schedule and routine. In general, beyond sleep, really establishing that circadian rhythm. So anyone that comes in the office and dealing with a chronic health challenge, I really stress routine, not only in regard to sleep, but when we're eating our food, supplementation schedule, just helping the body come back to some form of regulation can make a huge difference. Exercise, wonderful to get movement throughout the day, ideally several times, not just one 30-minute session at the gym. That does wonders, but if we're able to walk a little bit throughout the day and keep the blood flowing, that's really beneficial. Not too late in the day, so definitely do not want to exercise at night. When we exercise, we put out those hormones, cortisol, the adrenaline, and we want those to start to come down at night. So it can really contribute to people having issues falling asleep if they exercise, say 6, 7, 8. It's interesting, you drive by some of these 24-hour gyms, 9 o'clock at night, you'll see it's like they're packed. Like, it's amazing. I don't know how these kids do it. And yeah, it's just pretty wild. So avoid caffeine and nicotine, of course, for those adenosine receptor things we talked about in the earlier, but also nicotine also having some effects on neurotransmitters that we don't want to over time keep pushing. Avoid alcohol before bed. We talked about that really disrupting that REM sleep in particular, and how alcoholics, if they really suppress that over time, can look delusional and psychotic. Avoid large meals before bed, especially meals that are going to spike that glucose, which in turn can really drop that glucose and create a spike in cortisol and then wake us up at night. Avoid meds that disrupt sleep, so some asthma medication, some high blood pressure medication. Talk to your doctor about dose scheduling, of course, but some of these alone can contribute to sleep issues. I had a patient recently who was taking pregnenolone before bed, and that's something that can certainly stimulate a person, and we talked about that alone probably contributing to her sleep issues. Common sense, of course, relax before bed, so really take that time, an hour, 45 minutes before you go to bed. Read a book you enjoy with some low natural light. Try not to be spending time on those devices. And that goes with that. So a cool room, a dark room and a cool bedroom. So in general, trying to sleep as in dark of an environment as you possibly can. A sleep mask alone can make a huge difference if you are sensitive to that light. And I've heard if you can put your hand out about a foot away from your nose and see your hand in your bedroom, then it's potentially too light in your bedroom. So really the darkest environment possible is going to be best for sleep. And then getting that exposure of sunlight in the morning to set the tone for natural circadian rhythm. So ideally up to 30 minutes per day in that morning can make a huge difference with that rhythm. And then don't lie in bed awake. I thought this was really interesting advice. So if you're tossing and turning for more than 20 minutes or so, it's recommended that you get up and you find a low light activity that you enjoy. So whether it's a little bit of light stretching, yoga, you put on some low light and do some gentle, not too stimulating work, read a book. It's really can make a difference with helping you fall back asleep versus tossing and turning in the bed. Okay, so thank you I went over, but thank you very much for your time. I hope that was informative. I know I tried to. Thank you. Yeah. So, yes. Of course.
For so many people have wearable gadgets that tell them how their sleep is, and they can little reports that have this many times rest load, this many times awake. How can you interpret that?
Yes.
Where you're not like, oh, I have this terrible sleep issues.
It's hard. Some are definitely better technology than others. So some of the watches themselves, I don't know the accuracy, but there are some rings out there. In particular, I believe it's called the Oura ring. That's supposed to be very good at tracking sleep patterns. There's so many different variables, right? So partners in the bedroom too can definitely throw things off. I would say it's great to track the patterns over time and see if they really do add up, versus if there is a few outliers that tend to be sporadic, etc. You want to know if that data is going to be reproducible, and ultimately would love to see if it's going to match when you are able to do a sleep study as well. So yeah, I mean, wearing the gadgets, I think it can be great to a certain extent to see if you really have that pattern of wakening time and time again, but I don't know enough about the reproducibility of most of the technology to know if it's valid, especially if there's so many other variables that can take place that aren't like as independent as a sleep study is. Yeah.